So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the attendees from around the world, and a warm welcome to our speakers for this Daring City sessions. Today's session is From Nexus Thinking to Nexus Action in Food, Water, Energy Waste Management. My name is Poria Salehi. I'm the Research Officer with ICLEI World Secretariat and also the Coordinator of ICLEI's Global Research Strategy. I'll be moderating this session today. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. As you can see, you have been automatically muted. However, you will have the opportunity to submit any questions for our panelists and speakers by typing them into the Q&A box of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the panel discussion and Q&A part at the end of the session. You can also upvote the other participants' questions to indicate that you are also interested in having those questions asked. This function will help us address questions with the stronger interest first. We also want to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and the recording file will be shared on the Daring Cities website shortly after the event. This is to ensure that interested experts and colleagues in different time zones or with conflicting commitments can also benefit from the insights of today's session. Before starting, I would like to take a moment and first acknowledge the lack of gender balance contributions to our session today. This disparity is not lost on us. And here at ICLEI, we are well aware that such valuable insights in knowledge sharing remains as a huge conversation. Gender equality is a core organizational value for ICLEI and is part of our work ethics, which is why equality, including the gender equality, is a core element of ICLEI's overall vision and mission. More specifically, it is a cornerstone to one of the ICLEI's 5 pathways concerning equitable and people-centered development, in which we advocate for inclusivity in our urban communities. It must also be addressed that while our panelists are experts within their own rights, there are no ill intention of the panel being male-dominated, only by pure coincidence. We had actually invited a few female colleagues and experts to speak at this session, but unfortunately they couldn't make it to the session due to earlier commitments they had. For this reason, I think I speak for the whole panel when I say that we all value gender balance, knowledge sharing, and that we all have a part to play in bridging the gap in order to stimulate more inclusive, fruitful discussions. So with that in mind, let's dive into the topic that we will be discussing through the sessions. Nexus approaches have been receiving a lot of attention in recent years, with their approaches referring to the relationships between resources, understanding trades-off, and identifying synergies. In this regard, they can inform actions for efficient resource use and ensure that services are provided to communities while associated environmental impacts are minimized. Adopting Nexus approaches is becoming more and more common to address sustainability issues in an integrated way and help build more sustainable climate resilience and livable communities. However, operationalization of Nexus approaches comes with barriers since they challenges the existing structures, policies, and procedures. Effective research policy practice interface are key for promoting Nexus approaches because they allow for exchanges, co-evolution, and joint construction of knowledge and practices between different stakeholders. This session will explore the ways of doing this by looking at these interfaces from different vantage points. Topics that will be covered include Nexus science policy practice, creativity in stimulating collaboration and dialogue among stakeholders, and also the role of international and transnational research hubs in facilitating research and development to inform policy and action for food, water, energy, and waste nexus. The discussion will also benefit insights and preliminary findings of an ongoing Nexus project called Understanding Innovative Initiatives for Governing Food, Water, and Energy Nexus in Cities, shortened as IFVEN. This will be followed by an exemplary case of a local government, Nagpur in India, that successfully applied the Nexus approach via linking city-led research and evidence-based decision-making in the context of food, water, energy, waste nexus. By this, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the panel today. Matthias is a senior researcher at IVL Swedish Environmental Research Institute, who will be offering a researcher's perspective on Nexus approaches. More specifically, Matthias will be discussing the use of effective science policy practice interface in Nexus approaches towards promoting climate change mitigation and adaptation. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Matthias to share his thoughts with us on this topic. Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me share my screen here. So my name is Matthias Gustafsson. Hello, everybody. I work from IVL in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I will have my talk on the Nexus items, and specifically it will be on the experiences on climate change and mitigation. IVL is a research institute, and we have offices in Sweden, China, and India. And we have a vision of sustainable society, making science into reality and bringing from linear processes and so on to circular economy. And of course, Nexus approaches becomes an integrated part in this. We have working with stakeholders from private sector, from public sector, policymakers, researchers, civil societies, etc., etc., and bringing them together is really what this work that we are doing is all about. We are about 300 employees at the moment, and I will be talking a bit about one of the challenges we have. This is a picture from a small town in Moldova, and I think this somehow reflects what is our challenge. We need to bring the geese back home. We have a lot of different stakeholders that tend to like to walk together, but sometimes run off in other directions. And this is also the whole point of the Paris Agreement. We have said that we should be reaching climate emissions that brings us well below 2 degrees Celsius in global average temperature rise, and hopefully to 1.5 centigrades. Sweden, we have operationalized this. By the year 2045, we have said that net zero greenhouse gas emissions should be found in Sweden. And this should be arranged in a way that we have territorial emissions for 85% of this reaching this one, and the remaining 15% can be by supplementary measures outside the country. And as an action here, we have a project coordinated by IVL called the Mistra Carbon Exit. It's a research project that looks at the opportunities of providing carbon net zero carbon products and value and services in the society. It's a really good example where research, policy, and different stakeholders from industry, private sector, public sector, etc., are interacting in order to reach a common goal. There is a component of this project that is really about interaction. The project goes from an insight that there needs to be a transformative change to be able to get to the net zero emission. The things we see is that transport, infrastructure, and energy is of course key emission points for a country like Sweden. So one of the things we have done in the Mr. Carbon Exit project is to look on solution on basic materials. And some of the key aspects here is that cement and steel production accounts for 20% of Swedish emissions totally. And reaching the zero emission will definitely require transformative changes in these different products. And in the steel sector, for example, we had recently mentioned in the UN about the project where you go from coal reduction materials to hydrogen reduction as a sort of a transformative change in this sector. To achieve this, as of course I mentioned, the changes of processes, but there's also need for CCS, carbon capture and storage, electrification, increased use of biofuels, etc. And innovations, of course, can be mentioned as one thing, but we can hope for them, and they can bring new opportunities. But usually a lot of the technologies are already known at the moment. The Swedish steel and cement sector has actually already proposed technologies and time plans for decarbonizations. And the thing is how to do this. And one of the things is that if you provide new products in the cement industry and steel industry that are carbon neutral, the price increase for cement would be roughly 70% in the product and 25% in the steel. But if we look on how we actually use these products for, building a car or building a house or something, we can look at the price increase on the end product. And that one is really, really much less. We have 0.5% increase in the building per sort of unit. And the same thing if you go from a steel, a conventional steel today to the net zero carbon steel in the future, it's only an increase by 0.5% because there are so many other costs involved. So by providing this supply chain perspective, you can find a way to motivate how to work with these transformative changes. In Europe, of course, we have the EU ETS system, presently something like 20-25 euros per ton. It goes up and down, of course, but to comply with these targets, it would be required something like 100 euro per ton in order to reach it. And in order to look for the opportunities, of course, different policy instruments are investigated. One of the things here is, of course, that when you go for a policy instrument, you need to go for certain specific sectors, etc. So bringing in these trade-offs within other sectors where you have, you want to bring in the Nexus perspective can be a bit challenging here. And also the focus is very much on the decarbonization. But again, there are some items like green public procurement, standards on fuels, etc., that provides you with opportunities. The Mr. Carbon Exit project wanted to close in on these Nexus approaches in order to avoid trade-offs or unacceptable impacts on other sectors by applying the Sustainable Development Goals framework. The challenge is really about understanding the impacts, whether they are direct or indirect from these supply chain transformations, and whether there are benefits or trade-offs. But I think that based on our experience from the Mr. Carbon Exit, the Sustainable Development Framework provided a basis for a guided discussion of Nexus perspectives, if you like, in these transformative scenarios that we saw. Because if you discuss transformation from conventional steel production to a climate carbon neutral one, you can bring in aspects of biodiversity, life on land, etc., etc. So I want to close by coming back to this picture. It's again a way for us to go forward. I think the Sustainable Development Goals framework provides guidance to keep on track, even though we might have different opinions on exactly how we're going to reach the goals. We have some kind of framework and provide possibilities to break down silos and discuss with each other. So thank you for your attention. And my name is Mattias Gustafsson. I work at IVL. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for your very vivid presentation and also sharing this very meaningful picture. Sometimes a picture can tell more than 1,000 of words. So thanks so much and for setting the scene for our further discussion. Translating and transforming science into reality truly remains a key aspect for the potentiality of policy instruments for realizing national, local, and regional commitments, especially in light of the SDGs framework and of course, a Nexus approach. So thank you for that. Now I would like to introduce my colleague, Paul Curry, who's the manager of the Urban Systems Unit at our ICLEI Africa Secretariat, to provide an address to the previous presentation on science policy practice interface. So Paul is an expert who's been working for years with local governments, helping them shape their policies and basically what are the greatest barriers to implement Nexus approach at the local level. So basically, we would like to ask Paul, what is missing from the discussion so far, and what is needed to support local governments to implement Nexus approach? We are keen to hear your thoughts on this, Paul. The floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thanks, Priya, very much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here among colleagues to share some perspectives. I have to render some apologies up front that I'll have to leave on the hour, but please do throw some questions or comments into the chat or Q&A, and I'll type away in the background. My name is Paul. I work with local governments to support embedding systems thinking into the processes, and I'm based in Cape Town with the Africa Secretariat of ICLEI, and I'm going to provide three reflections, or organize my inputs into three reflections, which is when thinking about the global south and African contexts, we need to re-embed social into Nexus. The second is a familiar challenge which was voiced by Matthias already, the common challenge of silos and how Nexus intuitively and practically is about breaking through silos. So reiterating that challenge. And finally, what can be done in response? What are the options to help Nexus move from what we're seeing, which is these singular projects led by a singular champion, and how do we help those become more programmatic in our cities? So with the first one, Nexus emerged in the mainstream in 2011 with the stated objective that we wanted to improve food, water, energy, security for all. And that is still voiced, but in a way it's given way to a focus on resource optimization through quantitative analysis. And this is very important because it allows real decision, evidence-based decision making. And so if we can levy that for our cities and for decision makers, it allows us to achieve the transformative potential that Matthias was speaking about before. However, when we're looking at African contexts, our chief challenge is that we look very efficient if we are able to gather the data in the first place, because our resource consumption is very low. Whereas this is actually a resource deficiency, and we need to put a lot of our resources into improving quality of life and improving service delivery. And so our emerging kind of mission statement is we need to improve quality of life in our cities, but we need to do so in a resource productive manner, in a resource efficient manner, as well as an environmentally regenerative one. The difficulty with tracking, with data tracking in many southern contexts is that informal economies often make up the majority of our city. And if you are unable to measure it because it's quite decentralized, it often becomes invisible to the policymaker. It renders it invisible. So what we've been working on is trying to find other ways of knowing and valorizing other ways of knowing, such as through storytelling, photography, and bringing people into dialogue with different stakeholders. And I'm hoping David will add to this point, but I'll throw a link in the chat about a photo competition that we're running called Hidden Flows, which is very much around drawing attention to the types of infrastructures and resources that often go unnoticed in our cities, even as they are right in front of us. So the practice of Nexus faces this challenge of siloed departmental mandates, where one department has a certain performance indicator and a certain responsibility assigned, and this is often even tiered at different levels of government, which means that urban officers are reticent to take risks and move across their mandates. So while we're seeing that people are very familiar with the need to implement sustainability and understand that that needs to be a collaborative cross-sectoral approach, there are institutional barriers to achieving it. So we see very good integration within sectors, so integrated water across the value chain, integrated waste management hierarchies. We're seeing great strategies around that. But when it comes to working across departments, there are often no institutional incentives or drivers of that type of action. And this, as said before, means we have these champion-led projects which emerge from passionate people who are able to pull people together, and they often emerge accidentally when someone is sitting in a meeting and happens to have, for example, food expertise while sitting in a water management meeting, and can draw those links there. So there are many options for how we can approach a programmatic effect. The one is to go with what we're familiar with, which is improving more opportunities for tacit interaction across departments. Obviously, this is quite hard now that most people have gone virtual. We have less accidental interactions, but the idea of having more opportunities for coffee breaks, for mixed departmental meetings, can draw out those interconnections. And the other one is more formal, by putting specific key performance indicators either for a department or for an individual, which requires a certain number of collaborative projects, meetings, interactions, things like that. Similarly, our budgets tend to operate in a way that just rolls over from the previous year and gets approved based on seniority or the fact that it's been present in the budget for a while. So despite having a strong sustainability or integrated planning document, the budgets often aren't reformed each year based on these new strategic declarations or priorities. And so coming up with or rethinking budgeting, municipal budgeting, to respond to the strategies that have been written is really important, and attaching the KPIs to those new strategies. Another example that we've seen in some cities is drawing the links for driving resources to certain projects. So for example, if a city has an aim to undertake greening and draw more nature into cities, yet doesn't have the full resources to do so, how can other departments, for example, traffic and road management, contribute to that? They are responsible for upgrading roads. Those can include sustainable drainage or green features as well. So drawing those links is quite important for co-funding. And then finally, the value of intermediaries and external organizations in providing either the right advocacy and pressure on the city to take on processes, or taking a convening role, which is what ICLEI does, and a number of strong organizations in cities that can draw different departments together and excite them about a certain process, which leads to the desired outcomes. So those are a few thoughts. Again, I'm going to throw the link to our Instagram photo competition in there, as well as to our upcoming Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress, which you're all invited to register for, coming up in November. And again, please throw any comments, thoughts into the chat. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your thoughtful insight into the conversation with us. And to me personally, it was really interesting to hear from a person who's working with local governments closely and understands what is working, what is not, and what is needed actually. And for instance, one of the interesting point that you touched upon is the fact that we need to rethink budgeting, right? Because like with changing the strategies and adopting new strategies, like we need to make sure that cities are able to sort of reallocate the budgets and use the financial resources to address and sort of implement and operationalize the strategies that they have adopted. So that was a very interesting point. And as we have discussed so far, engaging actors across institutions and breaking silos is also essential for Nexus approaches. In order to ensure climate resilience, we need social coexistence, especially at the local level, for sure. Speaking of public engagement, our next presenter will introduce us to one way we could foster collaboration and transdisciplinarity in this field. David Maddox. Dr. David Maddox is the executive director of the Nature of Cities based in New York in the US. He completed a PhD in ecology and statistics at Cornell University, worked on climate change and stewardship with the Nature Conservancy, but is also a composer, musician, playwright, and theater artist. Very excellent profile and exciting for me also personally. In 2012, David founded the Nature of Cities, which is a transdisciplinary organization convening more than 900 experts, writers, activists, and also artists to discuss cities from different angles, cities as ecosystems of people, experience, nature, and infrastructure. So without any further ado, I would like to invite David to share his presentations with us. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi from New York. I'm David. I'm the Executive Director of the Nature of Cities. Thank you very much for this invitation. I was invited to talk about the idea of creativity and collaboration toward a more transdisciplinary engagement with the kind of ideas that we all share. I saw an exhibit in New York a few years ago by the paintings of Charles Birchfield. He was a landscape painter in the early 20th century. He was also a great diarist. He wrote over 10,000 pages about the things he was seeing. And one of the things he wrote really struck me. It's difficult to take in the glory of a dandelion as a mountain or a thunderstorm. What's he talking about? He's talking about this rich, complicated landscape, multi-dimensional, lots of different things going on. And we make decisions as he paints about things he brings forward, things he pushes back. And that strikes me as is very similar to the kind of work we're doing as we are building cities. How do you take in the glory of a dandelion or a mountain or a park or a city or a landscape? It's through acts of imagination that we can do those things. But the question becomes, whose imagination? What imagination? New science imagination that connects policy to ideas and data, policy imagination that connects to people's will, design and artistic imagination that creates new ideas from we didn't see before, and imagination among the people we are trying to serve who live in these cities and have hopes and dreams about the kind of cities they want. These modes of imagination they only find expression when they are more integrated with each other. Now, in conversations like this, we often talk about the idea of value. How much stormwater is collected by this bioswale? How much is it worth? What is the value of something? We also need to talk about values. What do we believe in? And those kind of conversations need to frame our conversations more. What do we believe in so we can talk with other people about the kinds of things we believe in? Why do we want to talk about a values-based language in terms of cities? Well, it's when we talk about the words we use and as we talk about cities, reveal what we think is really important. Cities are multidimensional, but if we only talk about cities in terms of transportation and business and money, as important as those things are, those are the cities we're going to get, and not green cities. We need to have conversations about values when we're creating our cities and the words we use to convey those values. And also ask, with whom do we want to have those conversations? And the short answer to that question is everybody. Creative, knowledge-based, collaborative, open, tolerant, secure, prosperous, green. These are the kinds of words that we would use that organize as values in our work. There also can be difficult words in the sense that they operate really well at the level of metaphor, where everyone can agree about, oh, sure, I want a knowledge-based city. Sure, I want a tolerant city. It's the details that it becomes that are difficult. So we can have agreeable metaphors that in fact are difficult to put into policy. So I want to make 4 points in my time here. And the first one is, through collaboration, we might create something we could not have created by ourselves. Effective collaboration changes us in fundamental ways. We see new things by learning a new point of view. We can build more complex working definitions, transdisciplinary definitions of words that once were either hopelessly technical or just agreeable metaphors. And in fact, we want to find something that's in between those two possibilities. What are some examples of such collaborations which span this difference? Here's a collaboration between a bunch of scientists and artist Mary Miss in Indianapolis, in which she used data from the scientists to map the areas in Indianapolis to show where a 100-year flood would be, a high water mark of a 100-year flood. Here's a collaboration between an environmental justice lawyer and an artist to create a series of environmental justice cartoons that could reach a wider population around these ideas. Here's a game in Chile that helps organize people's thoughts about where do we go during a climate emergency. Here's our artist Mary Mattingly in her work, in which she tries to find new ways to think about the idea of the connection between people and nature. Is it art? Is it knowledge? It's some fizzy place in between those two things that makes productive, asks new and productive questions about the kinds of values and ideas that we have. 2, people are a good idea. Let's talk to them. The stories that we tell within our disciplines only gain such social currency when they pierce the borders of these disciplines. We need to learn how to talk to other people. Paul mentioned the idea of storytelling. We need to be able to tell better stories about our work and the values that are embedded in it. They don't always have to be contests of ideas. We want to change and learn, not just to help inform people. That's one of the problems I have with the word dissemination in this context. Dissemination is all one way. We want to have an engagement in 2 directions across points of view. And that's because shared values don't always mean shared vocabulary. We also often don't mean the same thing when we use words, especially technical words. We convened a roundtable a few years ago of ecologists and landscape architects, fellow travelers in many ways, about the importance of ecology, and asked them, how do you use words? And it turns out that they use words completely differently. Words like wild don't mean the same thing for an ecologist and a landscape architect. Even words like evidence don't mean the same thing. We need a shared vocabulary to talk with people who may not agree with us, and a shared vocabulary so we can design better spaces for the people we're trying to serve. In this sense, we can expand the meaning of the idea of public space into something broader, a space that actually integrates a public sphere that melds knowledge and expression toward useful change. That is, public space is both a physical space and a conceptual space. It's a nexus of conversation. 3, telling collaborative stories about place to spread ideas and dialogue is important. When we mix ways of knowing and modes of action with other kinds of knowledge and forms of expression, we can tell important stories about place and meaning for everyone. Here's some examples of that. There's a project in Bogota in which a group is asking regular people, local people, about how they dream about the city that they want, that would be good for them. Children's drawings about landscape, also in Bogota. Is it art? Is it knowledge? Is it an insight into the kinds of things people want and see in the landscape and the environment around us? All of those things are important things for us to contemplate and see. Or a renovation of an ugly space next to a beautiful nature reserve in Portland. It was a collaboration between park activists and biologists and community workers and a willing owner to transform a space into a mural that both quotes the landscape and honors the landscape. Mary Miss again is in a project with scientists in the city of Milwaukee to talk about the idea of water consumption and its importance to climate change and climate patterns. Is it art? Is it knowledge? It's both of those things, and it's importantly both of those things. And finally, we need to search for combined expression. We often talk about artists as being thinkers apart from the rest of us, but creative ideas and their expression are not the exclusive domain of artists. Or scientists or elected officials or planners who also should be engaged in the idea of creativity and innovation. The public realm is physical and conceptual, and so it's a space for dialogue about things that we value. So we should say that expression is only half of dialogue. We talked about this idea of it needs to be back and forth, a two-way conversation. I can disseminate ideas, I can inform, but it becomes transdisciplinary when we're actually talking to each other. So back to the idea of Birchfield. He's trying to integrate a multi-dimensional thing and describe it in a way that communicates to other people. The words that we need to think about when we think of transdisciplinary collaboration, values, improvisation, intuition, perspective, imagination, these are not words that fit easily in scientific conversations or planning conversations, but they are the essential words for a collaboration. We have to have an imagination to see another person's point of view and be changed by it. And in that collaboration, we maybe can start to see things that we could not have seen before in a familiar word that now we see because we can interact with other people's points of view. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David, for this very insightful presentation, for showing us some examples across the globe. And particularly one sentence that you mentioned, and that was like the fact that like you don't like dissemination but engagement, which is basically provide the space for the other people, stakeholders, citizens to also engage and sort of provide feedback and have a say on the table. So I think you perfectly conveyed this message that the power of the arts is often overlooked in scientific debate. But you also illustrated how it can inspire important messages across networks and connect people from different backgrounds, especially in the context of food, water, energy, and waste nexus. Um, I would like to say that like I think like this world needs more of David with this unique perspective. So thank you so much, David. So continuing along with our theme in the subject area, our next speaker is Professor Jose Pupin. So based on his line of work and experience, I believe that it is safe to say that Jose wears many hats. For starters, he's a research professor at Getulio Vargas Foundation, FJV University in Brazil. He has over 20 years of experience in universities, businesses, think tanks, governments, and international agencies in research, teaching, training, and academic management. Currently, Jose is also the project leader for the Belmont Forum funded EFUN project, which ICLEI is also involved in. The EFUN project is about understanding innovative initiatives for governing food, water, energy nexus in cities. His presentation will elaborate on lessons learned from the EFUN project and how Nexus can be done at the local level. With this, I would like to invite Jose to share his presentations with us. Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Puria. Thank you, ICLEI, for the invitation to participate in this very interesting discussion. I would like to actually connect to what some of the previous speakers mentioned. Kind of this project is very ambitious. I'm going to show you the idea to try to understand how cities learn, how they gain capacity to actually innovate in Nexus, particularly using green and blue infrastructure. No, said I'm based in Brazil in FGV. That's a think tank, also a higher education institution, and this project is part of a larger initiative supported by JPI Urban Europe, Belmont Forum, European Union, that's the Urban Global Sustainable Initiative. And you have around 15 projects working this topic. This one of them, and you have several partners. And the idea here is to show you a little bit what we've been doing in this project, try to further understand the Nexus through this perspective that I just mentioned. You have the 7 partners, and also we are funded by 6 different research funding agencies around the world as part of the Belmont Forum. That's the umbrella organization of funding agencies that fund what they call transdisciplinary projects. That means that they are not only academic, they also have practical implications, and also they involve several disciplines in the discussion. And we are glad to have this project. Unfortunately, it's a little bit because of the COVID, things change, but I'm going to show you some of the results of the projects, also the discussions that you were having within our group. Why it is important. First, Nexus is related to most of the time when people talk about Nexus, they talk about water, energy, food. Sometimes they involve waste and other things, but in general, it's 3 components. And our component expected to have increased growth in terms of consumption in the last 30 years. Is, for example, food 60%, energy 80%, and water 55% until 2050. And most of this consumption will be driven, as you're going to see, by cities. I mean, the cities are centers of consumption, and these 3 components, most of the cities, they actually import from elsewhere. Most of the cities, they don't produce their own food, water, energy. They have to import, or from the surrounding areas or from far away. And this is why it's important to understand how you better manage the connections between these 3, and also how you better govern them in order to first reduce the impacts of the cities, not only at local level, but regionally, globally. When you talk about, deforestation in Borneo or in the Amazon, because soybeans production or meat production in the Amazon is not, they are not eating all the meat. Most of the meat are going to the cities, and it means the cities around the world. It means that the impact of cities, particularly in those aspects, they go beyond where I would say the administrative borders of the cities go much beyond. And the idea of Nexus, actually how we better govern these 3 components and make better connections among them. And then the project that is try to understand this mechanism, study, analyze them in studying where they are using GBI green and blue infrastructure to improve the Nexus, and you're moving now to create this framework to explain how cities develop those institutions to create capacity and what are the best learning mechanisms. And also you plan also to disseminate the findings and guidelines to how to step-by-step cities could improve the next components, and both to reduce the impact as well, increase the resilience. I mean, you'll be less dependent on these 3 components from elsewhere. And you have done a lot of work on first trying to understand better what kind of innovations they have and what kind of innovations we have in the cities, how they are connected. See, you have several, this is just a picture showing how the different innovations in city are clustered and how they are connected, and means the Nexus is not disconnected completely from its very physical components, the 3, food, water, energy, but they are connected to a broad set of discussions and initiatives we have in the cities in transportation, land use, education, health, and so on. This Nexus is really about how to better think these three components in a broad city-urban perspective. Just to give some of our findings, for example, we've been looking at around the world, around 120 cities, particularly in the called the global south, developing countries. You identify around 120 different cities that have certain innovations and green blue infrastructure, and these range from the typical green space, urban agriculture, to issues related to green roof water bodies and street trees that use these to try not initially to tackle food, water, energy as a main issue, but they end up having a lot of impacts on these three components. And they most of the time they are created these initiatives, these interventions for certain purpose, and those purposes vary across regions. You're looking here, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Asia. You see, for example, in Africa, there are a lot of concerns about nutrition. And most of the green and blue infrastructure that are related to agriculture or certain edible trees, trees that can have fruits or other things they can eat, because this is a major concern in Africa. While in Latin America, a lot of projects of these components are related to regulate climate and flood. For example, a lot of cities, they have problems related to they don't have enough capacity to absorb the increasing storms that you have in Latin America that create many problems in cities. And then many of the Nexus, they are focused on this specific component of flood prevention. And based on these large set of cities that we're look more quantitative components, you also do in-depth research in 10 cities around the world. And in these three regions, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And those cities, you are looking more to try to explain some of the findings you have. For example, how cities learn, what are the main learning mechanisms, what kind of the drivers they have for the innovations, from where these innovations came, or from where they learn from, and so on. And then these you're doing more in depth with the participation of the cities themselves. You're going to have, after my presentation, one of the cities, Nagpur, in India, showing a little bit what they're doing in those terms, but you're trying now also to make a better interaction among the cities, that see how cities learn from each other in a more structured way. This is the next part of the project. The last year of the project, you try to put the city to work together and make them learn from each other. And the idea is to understand how this innovation happened in the Nexus, and how to make them happen, what kind of learning mechanisms, what kind of interventions that actually make more sense, looking at broad picture what the cities are doing around the world and specific learning from the cities. Okay, and you're looking, how they learn, and our idea of innovation is very broad, do things differently, with, and how they gain this capability to do things differently. And you have already identified this learning mechanisms, one way or two way, and different region. And we're interested in most of the cities around the world is in the external and two-way learning, is how they create the capabilities to innovate. Most of the time, external means external from the city, from governments or NGOs, or even from international organizations, and also have difference among the regions. For example, in Asia, in Africa, a lot of learning from foreign organizations because of the aid components they have. While in Asia is a lot of interactions, NGOs and civil society. Look at these components where the learning mechanisms come. And then there, finally, in my last slide, looking at the Nexus, our projects, how to innovate, how to connect, try to solve global problems, climate change, biodiversity loss, and food, water, energy security with local initiatives. And for developed countries, particularly these, you have the old problems, I say, poverty, pollution, these, but and have a different agenda of implementation. That the solution of this problem, local problem, don't cause global problems like happened in the southern city. They clean up, but they send all the polluting industry to other countries. And then our idea is to try to have. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Sorry, I went a little bit over the time, but I look forward to the discussion.
No, thank you so much, Jose. I know that, since I have the pleasure of being involved in this project, I know like how vast is this project, and you were trying to condense all the findings and key messages and takeaways and share that with the audience in this short amount of time. So really appreciate that for that. Indeed, we, as you mentioned, we often overlook ground level solutions instead of acknowledging how local governments can be key to bridging disparities. So the linkage between global and local should not be undermined when, as your presentation suggests, understanding innovative initiatives for governing food, water, and energy nexus in cities. So thank you for that. With that introduction on the role of local governments enabling nexus approaches, up next we will be hearing from one of the cities applying food, water, energy nexus, among other nexus approaches, the city that is also part of the IFAN project, Nagpur in India. The following speaker is Mr. Rajesh Dufer, who is the executive engineer at the Nagpur Municipal Corporation in India. Rajesh has been greatly involved in projects facilitating research-driven policy and science-informed local action. He will introduce us to the story of Nagpur in relation to food, water, energy, waste nexus. So I would like to invite him to take the floor. Rajesh, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I am Rajesh Dufare, working as a executive engineer in Nagpur Municipal Corporation. I am here since I think 16 years and looking after most of the projects related to water, wastewater, and solid waste management. I would like to thank ICLEI for sharing the story of Nagpur through Urban Nexus approach. We implemented Nexus, Urban Nexus project with the assistance of GIZ and ICLEI. Today, I'll be talking about a unique project which this Nagpur Municipal Corporation has envisaged, thought of, and implemented, in which we are treating the wastewater, which is polluting the river, and selling it to the nearby thermal power plant, from which we are also getting a revenue, a handsome revenue we are generating from it. The city of Nagpur, which lies in the central part of India, is a greenest city, one of the greenest city in India, and I think it is the 10th largest accommodation with a population of 24 million plus, 2.4 million plus population, which is residing here. The water demand in the city is around 600 MLD, million liters per day, and the wastewater generated is around 520 MLD. The wastewater generated here is mostly let out in the river, which is polluting the rivers, and the people residing on the downstream of this river, mostly the villages, they are consuming this water without treatment. So because of that, there is a lot of health hazard on the downstream side, and people are getting affected by various diseases. On this, Nagpur Municipal Corporation then envisaged to go ahead with the water treatment project, wastewater treatment project. Under that, we have a joint agreement with a power generation company, which is very nearby to this city, for treatment and using of this wastewater, treated wastewater for their power generation company. like coal washeries, cooling towers, they will be using that. Because of this agreement, we will be saving fresh water, which was earlier used for power generation. This project is one of its kind in India. By this, we are swapping the fresh water, and we are also generating a revenue of around 1.7 million euros per annum for the municipality. For this project, we got a revenue from funding from central government, and this municipality had nothing to invest in it. All the funds were received from the government. This project, only the piece of land, a piece of land of 15 acres was provided by the municipality for erection of this project. Then grant was received from the government, and wastewater was to be supplied to the power generation company. Power generation company erected the project, and the treated water of 130 mld was to be provided to them. The total generation was around 500 mld, out of which we are providing 130 mld to the Mahagenco plant, which is a power generation plant. This project was commissioned in July 2018. And from this plant, we are getting a revenue of 1.7 million per annum. Now, the present treatment capacity of city is around 340 mld, and the generation is 500 mld. For complete 100% treatment, we have also proposed some other sewage treatment plants under various projects, like one is Nag River Pollution Abatement Project. It will be taking care of 92 mld STPs. Then there is decentralized plants on the stretch of the rivers, which will be around 63 to 65 mlds. And there is one another South Sewerage Zone project, which will be treating of around 30 mld. So if these STPs are to come up within a couple of years, after we complete these projects, we will be having a capacity of 100% treatment capacity. These again, we are planning for treatment of these sewage through these STPs, which will be again provided for power generation, which will be useful for power generation companies, townships to be coming up, parks, gardens, which will reduce our freshwater demand. This freshwater can be supplied to the nearby areas for drinking purposes. So in this way, we are treating the wastewater, having a revenue generation from it, and swapping of water can be done from it. The potential benefits you can see, the swapping, which I have already explained. The second one is the revenue generation. The third will be the reliable and economic source of water for power plants. Also on this project, on the basis of this project, the Government of India have framed a policy for recycle and reuse of wastewater. And this policy will be implemented by most of the power stations, or most of the states are implementing this policy. Again, we have planned a 200 mld of STP, which will be again on a PPP model. And in this PPP model, municipality doesn't have to invest anything. Whatever water we are treating from this will again be sold to a power generation company, and the amount coming from, or the revenue generation from this power plant, will be given to the PPP operator. So a municipal corporation is nothing to invest in the project. So this is a good, I think, urban nexus project, through which we are treating the wastewater also, reducing the pollution, environment pollution, pollution of water, and a revenue generation model for municipalities, which other municipalities are also working on it. So I think this is a good example of urban nexus, which will be helping other cities, other countries, which can take an example of this and can plan accordingly. So I think this is from my side.
Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajesh, for this very valuable insight and sharing the story of the city of Nagpur. It is very helpful and important to include the perspective of cities in the Nexus conversation and to showcase successful examples such as Nagpur, especially ones that will inspire other municipalities on the local, regional, and international scale. Um, so our following speaker will add another nuance to the Nexus conversation. Speaking of international influence, our next presenter, Jonas Bailun, is the Research and Innovation Officer at the Management Board of JPI Urban Europe. JPI Urban Europe aims to address a comprehensive and systematic view of current and future urban challenges by bridging technology issues and as well as environmental and socio-economical aspects of the discussion. And Jonas will focus on science policy communication, developing urban research and innovation funding calls. Particularly, Jonas will talk about the role of international and transnational research hubs and funders in facilitating research and development to inform policy and action for food, water, energy nexus at the local level. He will share with us how JPI Urban Europe, particularly as a research hub, is further promoting Nexus approaches through partnership programs. With this and without any further ado, I would like to invite Jonas to share his insight with us on this topic. Jonas, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I must hesitate to say it's quite a lot to talk about when we're talking about various ways of supporting or programming for various kinds of nexi, I guess you should say, in the urban setting. So with that kind of disclaimer, maybe I will be a bit more general and a bit more rushing through the kind of the small kind of entry points that we have found in doing this, or rather perhaps the relevance for thinking like a nexus. So our point into this is, as you mentioned kindly, the Sustainable Urbanization Global Initiative, as the call was named, collaboration with the Belmont Forum, with which we share a lot of funding agencies. JPI Urban Europe is a similar kind of setup that kind of works with ministries and funding agencies, public funding agencies in various countries, and kind of pool it together in a transnational program setting. And that's where I am, in the middle of that. The European Commission was also part of this. And as our name suggests, we are kind of a lot in Europe, but we're not only in Europe. The call had three kind of thematic areas. One was robust knowledge, one was multi-level governance and management aspects of the food, water, energy nexus, and then we also had potential strategies and solutions when it comes to risk issues in the food, water, energy nexus. So looking at that, I guess I agree very much, and I'm very grateful that you invited me to say something or signal our interest in this when it comes to moving from nexus thought to nexus action, because that is exactly what we try to do with this call, and we are also following the projects closely to see how they're getting there. So perhaps most of you already know why we need these kinds of nexus approaches, and I'm trying here to perhaps lift a bit from food, water, energy, and those kinds of infrastructural issues to a more general sense of this. But there is at least one reason, of course, why we would need it, and that is integrated urban development. If you look at the Agenda 2030, and look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, it's clear that 11 on sustainable cities and communities, of course, has a lot of potential interactions or potential wicked issues together with other goals or support even. So here's one way where you see that you really need to be able to look and work with kind of in between different silos, sectors, what have you, uh, different fields when it comes to research or different kind of practice areas as well. So that's one thing. But also if we look at something that it at least in Europe has become more and more kind of emerging on a policy level, especially during COVID and in recovery debates, is the donut economic model, where you see on the one hand, you have a layer of planetary resources, planetary boundaries, probably is the correct, better word. But also you have another kind of layer around or limits or thresholds where you shouldn't go under regarding welfare, livability, etc. And how you manage that is probably also where you need a lot of this kind of nexus thinking, and not just the thinking, not just the conceptual version, but actually on the ground being able to do kind of connecting the dots between different infrastructural, different almost ontologies at times, because these fields of knowledge are also very different in how they understand urban situations at times. So Nexus is a different way perhaps of saying how to tackle the complexity in urban challenges in general and how to do integrated urban development. But it's also a way of saying, let's do it in bite-sized chunks, because tackling the whole complexity at once is rarely kind of a good way forward, I guess. So at least what we're trying to do, and this is perhaps more of on a European situation, but for the next 7 years, there are new framework programs for research and innovation in Europe, as well as other ways of supporting urban development. What we're proposing is a partnership that will deal with these issues in a way. So you see there are energy issues in one pillar, there are mobility and accessibility issues in another pillar, and then more greening and nature-based solutions, as well as circular economies in a third. And of course, you see that there are overlaps at times through these, but also a need for kind of nexus thinking or nexus work if we're going to achieve anything in our urban areas. Of course, we're also extending our collaboration efforts throughout the world, more or less, as much as we can. But on a kind of a programming level, the action is also the kind of nexus action is also to connect these with different dilemmas, as we tend to say, and it's the 4 horizontal bars: digital transitions and urban governance, resilience and robustness, infrastructures, inclusive public spaces, etc. These are areas where we know that there are lots of dilemmas and challenges, wicked issues, rather than just finding solutions and implement them and then go, so to speak. So in this way, we're perhaps not so much intent on breaking silos with our nexus thinking, but perhaps to find several ways of thinking, different kinds of nexus to connect and start shaping, let's say, communities of practice to understand different parts in this sometimes archipelago of sectors or focus areas of concern, issues, and different types of challenges that look different in different parts of Europe, and it looks different in different parts of the world, as Jose was talking a lot about in the If When project. So that's where we see a lot of the kind of challenges when it comes to action on the ground is also what David was talking about, the maybe not a shared language, but the the strange ways when people say similar words but mean rather different things, the kind of different understandings of the same kind of shared urban setting. And that's sometimes a huge concern in high level policy making, as well as down in kind of district muddling through and implementation actions, if you will, or tackling challenges. So I say that's it for me at the moment, but I'm looking forward to what the discussions will give now. I guess that was my 8 minutes. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Jonas, for keeping your presentation in time, and of course for your vivid presentation. First, I really liked about the word that you brought it up, Nexus, terminology conversation. And I think that's a very good example to showcase that like there's still not even a widely agreement on terminology, let alone how to do the Nexus. But in general, I truly appreciated that you shared your insights and also for sharing for shedding light on the DUT pillars, Jonas. So I would say I couldn't agree more that making research and innovation a reality and which falls in line with city sustainability will require a different perspective on the way we address urgent and long-term challenges in the field of sustainable urban development. So ladies and gentlemen, moving along, today we heard from 6 experts from different backgrounds and perspective on the importance of effective science policy practice interface, how to bring different stakeholders to the table, and how to support, finance, and do Nexus approaches at the local level, sharing highlights of an ongoing research and innovation project, IFEN, by an established international expert like Jose, and also hearing the story of a local government with regard to adopting Nexus approaches. So we are now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. However, all the questions were answered by the speakers, mainly David and Matthias. So thank you for that. I'm happy to ask my own questions from the panelists. But as a reminder, you can still submit and upvote questions using the Q&A box. I would also like to ask all the speakers to turn on their videos and take questions as appropriate. So I would like to start with Matthias. So Matthias, as a transformation towards sustainability will not work without fundamental structural changes. Linear processes into circular economy will require a vision to negate the uncertainties of complex development. So in what ways can environmental instruments spur technological innovation that can positively shift the cost-benefit balance while addressing nationally determined contribution goals at the local level?
Okay, thank you. I would like to go back to, I think, what David was saying. I was very inspired by the 1 + 1 is more than 2. Basically, I mean, the idea is very much to find, you know, like buzzwords where we keep saying synergies and win-win situations and so on. But I think it links very much to find the shared understanding of what actions can be done and needs to be done. Because in one way, where we are at the moment is not going to be possible to continue with. I mean, there needs to be change, and change is a natural part of our society, and of course as humanity, and of course Earth as such. And I would say that bringing these changes is all about understanding the processes that are required mutually. And one of the comments that we had in the questions was about what are the biggest challenges for things to happen. And I also think that another question was related to how do we convince someone that this needs to be done. And I think it's really about inclusive approaches, and the nexus in a sense, and also we have mentioned transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity and so, and where we interact with each other. So the inclusiveness is also to bring self-reflexivity to ourselves as researchers in a sense, to understand that what we understand as the simple solutions might need to be transformed in a way that sort of brings acceptance in other stakeholders' views. And maybe we need to understand that there are other words. I know myself, for example, I'm not an economist, so that's a kind of words that I'm sort of struggling with, but I know that it's very powerful in other ways. So I don't know if it answers the question, but this is how I see it. I think we need to also understand that our truth are sort of in our sort of sectors and so on, and really it's about finding common ground.
No, thank you so much. I think we all can agree that this is a broad, very broad question that needs to be answered. And of course, you brought up a few different angles, like from inclusivity, also like talking about the importance of understanding processes, which I think definitely is the case. And I guess we can talk about it for hours for sure. So I would like to ask a question from David. David, I think we all can agree that cities are being or should be recognized as an ecosystem within their own right, as well as the importance of people and nature coexistence in the same spaces. If there is any lessons learned from the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, it's that it has highlighted the need for accessible and productive urban green spaces for low-income and marginalized groups. Based on recent studies highlighted this disparity, what can local governments do to balance biodiversity, inclusivity that Matthias was talking about, and further stakeholder engagement, which will in turn reveal what we feel as being the most important for our communities?
I think I've come to believe that justice questions are and must be embedded in everything that we do now. I often start talks by saying to a group like this, do you really believe in the benefits of nature, benefits of ecosystem services? Do you really believe that? If you do believe that, then you also have to believe, then you also have to ask yourself the question, who should have access to those benefits? Who should enjoy those benefits? Well, I think most of you people would say everybody. Does everybody now? No, they don't. It's just desperate how unequal access to these things that we claim are benefits are. And why that's important is as we're getting the chance to rethink the cities. One thing we would say about COVID is in this rush back to, let's get back to normal. Well, we should recognize that the old normal was part of the problem, and that we actually want to take this moment to reinvent a new normal that's based on this set of values that we have. There was a thread in the Q&A section, and I made an answer to that. Was one of the core ideas is having metrics for having discussions about this. And there's a really interesting one that Trust for Public Land has created called Park Score. And it's a simple thing which says how many people are within a 10-minute walk of a park. And what's beautiful about it is that it's really simple. It's simple to think of, it's simple to conceive. You can measure one's progress to it. The TPL has their thing is that they certify cities as being how far along are they to that goal. Boston is 100%, for example. And many cities around the world, they're just not. New York is not. And it starts to give you a sense of how you might achieve that 100%. And for example, in terms of structurally, one of the ways you can do better is with linear parks. Why? Because linear parks, they spread their area over through more neighborhoods, so more people are close to them. linear parks don't work for everything, don't work for biodiversity, and you can't put a ball field on it exactly. But if one of your metrics is access, a linear park is great. So open data and access to me are key, because open information, having everybody available to information available to everybody is key to having a real conversation. That's true in any aspect of life, and that's what we need to do also in our green-oriented city building as well. But we have to do it in ways that people can understand. They can't be too. We can't be too technical. It actually has to. We have to use language that people can actually engage with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David. I guess like it was very interesting that you were like setting the scene for that, but also like offering the solution, but also like explaining the limitations of the solution. So it was really helpful. Thank you so much for that. Being mindful of the time, I would like to ask a question from Jose as well. But like I saw two questions actually, two new questions in the Q&A box, which I guess Jose could address. But I would like to sort of merge those two questions. So Jose, the question is, what about the Nexus outcomes? How such a complex system can be evaluated? Who's the main accountable part? And then like linking to the first question written there, if we deem that local governments are one of the accountable parties, um, then how the city governments manage or govern the indirect effects of cities in the global space with regard to the nexus?
Yeah, this is a very important question, because actually what finding out that most of the cities in the world, they don't control these two components. They are governed by other organizations. Just give an example in Brazil, the water is a state company, and the energy in general is a private company, but they are regulated nationally. And also the food, they are is an issue that most of the cities don't even know from where the food comes from. And in case it's most private markets that are sometimes out of control in cities. And this is a big governance problem, because the cities in the end, they are accountable for those issues, but they most of the cases they don't control, they don't have the mechanisms to do that. And you try to find what kind of leverage the cities can have to actually control those issues. Maybe, for example, in the demand side, for example, energy, a lot of cities, they control, for example, building regulations that could help in terms of energy efficiency. In terms of water, the same thing, they control drainage systems or systems that can rainwater harvest and things that they can also try to have more leverage on those systems. And most of them, those systems, they are not connected, they're completely disconnected. There's three different systems that affect each other, but there is no institutions that connect the three systems. This is actually one major challenge for the Nexus.
Perfect, Jose. Thank you so much for addressing that from different angles. And I guess there was nothing left to me to talk about that. So really appreciate that. So one last question for Jonas. In your presentation, you mentioned three prioritized sectors and their interrelationships aligned with the Green Deal for Sustainable Urbanization. So one of those focus areas is the 15-minute city, which seeks to rethink urban mobility system and space. In light of COVID-19, how has this idea of compact, integrated city, if you may, or neighborhood changed in order to continue fitting a holistic and systematic view of urban transition? How do you see that?
Wow. I'm not sure. Let's try to keep it simple. It's something we have learned trying to work with different types of actors. I try to simplify the language quite a lot, and I'm still very convoluted. But I guess, well, one thing that we have seen and why we are kind of also pushing, or we feel that we have a mandate to push the 15-minute city, which is a lot about mobility and accessibility in your everyday life. So there are also a lot of kind of justice and equity issues involved in that, but it's also, you can look at Paris, for example, to see how they are, or Anne Hidalgo is trying to work it. They're at the front. There are other cities, but of course, COVID-19 or the corona crisis across the world has also shown that, or perhaps shaped experiences. For example, if we're looking at the increase of bike lanes and similar, that mobility, or let's say the private car dominance, it's not a natural state of being, but it's a choice, and starting to opening perhaps political acceptance or kind of different ways of breaking that wall of private car dominance that has been around. At least that's what we've seen in Europe. I guess in the United States and North America, we've seen similar ways of, let's say the city isn't as, or urban areas aren't that kind of transit cities anymore, but it's actually a lot more about neighborhood movements and so on. So I think these are all experiences that we should be very careful about, and not just kind of rush into a recovery now where we're trying to get back to normal, because normal was killing a lot of people, especially marginalized people, because of say our mobility practices that we've had, and at least in the north, right? So yeah, that's my kind of way of answering that for the time being. I think we have learned a lot, and let's hope that we're not wasting this, what we've learned in the kind of crisis or in the kind of extreme situations that we have.
Thank you so much, Jonas. I guess I would like to echo particularly your last sentence. Let's not forget, and let's make sure we really learn from what we are going through at the moment. We have been, as human community, we have been through unprecedented situations before, but this very recent pandemic showed that probably communities, policymakers, and decision takers may need to sort of make sure that they build upon the lessons learned from the previous shocks and challenges, and to prepare the communities to sort of accommodate new shocks and make the communities more resistant. So we are almost at the end of the session. So I would like to thank Matthias for beginning our session today by introducing the need for transformative change. It was really interesting to hear how how cities need to adopt these sort of approaches in general, but also hear from Matthias how this can be applied to supply chains, and the importance of thinking about how we benefit procedures and producers and consumers. Also, thank you, Paul. I mean, Paul just hopped off because of another commitment, but thank him for sharing his reflections on the Nexus with us. It has definitely brought attention to the importance of cross-disciplinary discussions, where it be informal coffee breaks in the workplace or formalized strategies, such as the implementation of indicators that departments can work towards. This links to Matthias' message of the need to break down silos and the Sustainable Development Goals being an effective framework for achieving that. Also, thank you, David, for highlighting how important it is for us to discuss what we value in cities and to include everyone in the conversation. The idea of having tree markings to show predicted flooding 100 years from now sounds very thought-provoking, and a very powerful way to kickstart a conversation on how we want to shape our cities. Conversations between different stakeholders has certainly been a key takeaway message from our session today, for sure. Also, thank you, Jose. It was great to hear about the widespread influence of the IFEN project. This project really demonstrates that local governments are key players in solving global issues and front runners. and that cities should be encouraged to innovate and learn. And also, thanks Rajesh for outlining the wastewater management project in Nagpur. That example reminds us of the way Nexus projects, like those mentioned by Jose, improve people's everyday lives. And in the case of Nagpur, increasing access to clean water and maintaining against the health issues that result from water contamination. And last but not least, thank you, Jonas, for detailing the importance of linking silos together and pooling finance. It's great to hear how Nexus thinking can transition to becoming underground projects. But as you said, we must tackle urban complexity to make this reality. So by this, we would like to thank all our speakers, Matthias, Paul, David, Jose, Rajesh, and Jonas, for sharing their insights. And also all the attendees, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, for attending and engaging with us in this conversation and discussion today. On behalf of ICLEI and our presenters, I would like to thank you for joining us today, and I would like to wish you a great rest of the day. Have a nice day.